Welcome to the Intelligence Briefing Live, What's the Buzz? Where leaders and hands-on experts share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today, we'll talk about setting up your center of excellence. And who better to talk about it than someone who's really passionate about it and who's been doing that for a good part of their career. Chris Johannessen. Hey, Chris, thanks for joining.
Hey, thank you, Andreas. It's great to be here and to kind of share a few things in 15 minutes or less with the audience today.
That's awesome. Hey, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are and what you do?
Sure. Chris Johannessen. I've been doing work with CoEs, knowledge management, digital and technology, and analytics and data transformation for well over 20 years now. I'm not afraid to say. You can see by the little bit of gray hair on top of my head here. I've had the opportunity to get up to speed and learn this in the early days of my career with a nice run at General Electric, where I was facilitator of knowledge management. I even had a CoE for how to do CoEs within GE, except we call them communities of practice and back in the day. And then along the way, someone decided that the word excellence sounded better than practice and a little bit more exciting. And I think I would agree. And then from then, I've had other different stops in my career journey, building marketing CoEs with clients and internal organizations such as eBay Enterprise and some others, and then onwards into the world of management consultancy, where I've had some stints with organizations such as McKinsey, SIA Partners, global consultancies, and Access Group most recently, which is more of a boutique provider in the data and analytics space, but helps set the stage for automation and AI with great data. So, and when I'm not doing all that, I actually do find time for other things. I'm editor of the Journal of AI, Robotics and Workplace Automation, published by Henry Stewart Publications out of the UK, and I've been doing that. We just had our first full year of 4 issues, so we're kind of celebrating volume 1. And I do some academic advisory as well with some universities in the greater Philadelphia region. So
fantastic. So hey, it really sounds like you are the person to talk to when it's all about CoEs. I'm really glad that you joined. You know, we've met earlier this year, even in person, and talked about some of these things. So I'm really excited that we're able to make this happen and you're able to join. So thanks again. Now, for those of you just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat if you're leading a CoE, or if you are or have been working in one, or if you just want to learn more about it, and maybe join one and see if that is an organizational model that would appeal to you. But maybe, Chris, should we play a little game and kick things off here?
Sure. Why not?
Awesome. So, game time. So this game is called In Your Own Words. When I hit the buzzer, the wheels will start spinning. And when they stop, you'll see a sentence. And I'd like you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind. And why? In your own words. And, you know, to make it a little more interesting, you'll only have 60 seconds for your answer. Now, are you ready for What's the Buzz?
I'm ready. Get ready, player 1.
Okay, perfect. Then let's do this. If AI were a tool in a hardware store, what would it be and why?
If it were a tool in a hardware store, it would be something that could help me find other tools much more easily than my wanderings around our local Lowe's and Home Depot and even the family-run hardware shop that's in my area. I honestly sometimes spend way too much time looking for the right size nut, bolt, screw when I'm trying to do some household project work.
Fantastic, and well within the minute. When you said something that could help me find other tools, I was envisioning a directory, but how you described it sounds a lot more personalized and a lot more specific to your needs. That's awesome.
Yeah, it could be like so we have in our local supermarkets in the state of Pennsylvania, one of them has a robot that kind of rolls around the aisles, and it could be something like that with a funny face on it and talks to me, gives me clues. So
very true, yes. And my little ones are never quite sure whether to be excited or to be scared when it follows them through the aisle. Anyways, so let's jump into our questions. Well, I feel a lot of times these days, if I say automation, you say CoE. It's that well connected, and it seems that at least to me, it's like the go-to org setup in a company if you want to get started with AI and automation. But if we also, before going there and into that default model, maybe let me ask you this: when should you actually set up a CoE, and when shouldn't you?
Well, that's an interesting question. It depends on the industry vertical that your company is in. It depends on the size of the company as well. Obviously, for a very small company, Andreas might be the one-person CoE. There's a funny meme that floats around the internet and LinkedIn recently about where's all the company knowledge, and then there's a picture of some person that says, "I am the knowledge." So there's some, certainly some scale considerations in terms of the current state, but also the future state aspirations. Other things might be you have to do a little bit of, just like somebody might be in terms of a little bit of startup thinking, do a little exploring and see if somebody's doing some automation already within the company. Typically you find pockets of automation in areas such as maybe finance, with depending again on the company, with some risk automation or something like that. In marketing, those are areas where you might see some automation in play as well. Even in call center operations or other internal operations. So it all depends on the industry vertical. Certainly for the organizations that SAP tends to work with, and I'm sure a lot of our audience is part of today, larger scale organizations start to think towards an automation CoE, and with that you have to have the right shared definition of what automation actually is in the first place. Like I said, some people might hear the word automation and just think, oh, reporting automation, the analytics, people already do that. You don't need a CoE. If you're looking to bring something rather new and innovative in, like robotic process automation, AI as a service, software platforms, or even so-called smart workflow that are out there now that have some AI capabilities, there might be some workflow already existing in the organization, but if not, that would certainly be a ripe opportunity for bringing automation in. Now, AI is a different animal. I've heard different people say, well, maybe AI should just be part of the automation CoE. I've heard some people recently say, well, AI should be part of analytics, because in order to do proper AI, it's very, people think of AI, they tend to default to statistical ways of doing decisioning, such as machine learning based type of AI or semantic rules engines types of AI. And with that, you need data scientists who build models, who then push the models into something. And where else is a better place in that than with the analytics team? And although sometimes they say, no, it should be with the automation team, because the end point is to make this stuff automated in production, whether it's internally facing or customer facing, depending on context.
So maybe building on that, what would you say is like the key role of the CoE when you set it up, or when you have a dedicated team for it?
Well, first and foremost, the key role is going to be educating the organization about just what automation and AI is in that particular context. And with that, some of the older models I mentioned, back in the day, we just kind of did like a one size fits all CoE, and kind of like, how commercials used to be, write the ad for the Super Bowl, write a big giant check, you get one commercial fits all. But now you have to think about not only the audiences internally, but bring in a little bit of newer thinking. Some people might be aware of the idea of design thinking and thinking about personas within the organization. You're going to be targeting automation and AI as a value driver to different people in the company, not only their different role levels and responsibility, but also different functions as well across, we're leader of operations versus leader of marketing. So you have to get that story out there, what it is, what's the value proposition. It may start as simple as a slideshow. You may do some company events or lunch and learns, things like that, to kind of drive some awareness or things like that. So, and with that, you start to identify. I noticed someone dropped in the idea of champions. It's always good to find a champion, someone who is either already excited about the topic or could just be an executive who saw something shining and magical at an event and said, I need that too, or they heard competitor 1, 2, 3 has it, and they feel like they have a gap as company number 4 in the vertical that they've got to do some catch up.
Perfect. And I know I'm a little late to taking a look at the chat, but I see some answers to our tool question from hammer to adjustable wrench, Swiss Army knife. A lot of good thoughts and suggestions there. And I also see we have a very global audience. So from Darmstadt, Germany, to India, to the UK and the US. It's awesome having you all with us here today. So thanks for joining. So maybe let's continue. So great, you set up the CoE. They should help educate and enable parts of the organization about what AI or automation or whatever other topic is. And that's great, right? As a leader, to your point, you made that decision. I need a CoE. I understand why I would want one. Maybe you've been just hired to set one up. And I feel one of the next steps is, well, what should that org structure and that setup look like? And what does the engagement model with my stakeholders look like? So I'm curious what you've seen there and what you recommend.
Sure. As with any kind of anything resembling a program in an organization, at least with the stakeholders, you want to, say, you have this mission, almost like a mission and a vision for what the CoE is all about. Not only, the materials to kind of get people motivated and excited about the rewards of automation, but also the risk as well. Sorry, I might hear the printer. I have a printer next to me. I share a house with somebody else.
We are live.
The little bit of automation intruding, automated printing intruding here. But you've got to be able to educate the audience on what the risk and rewards and talk about a timeline and a process for how you're going to start bringing the CoE to life. Like, what does the early stages look like? What's kind of like the middle stages, and kind of what's the ideal end state of what the CoE is supposed to do. And of course, CoE is supposed to be more about just educating, getting people excited. You've got to have policies and procedures going towards the risk side. You have to be careful. That reminded me of your remark earlier this week on LinkedIn, where you don't want the CoE to be like a cop and stopping the presses and people no longer get excited. But all the things in between, like who are the experts? CoE might just start with simple as an expert directory. But then you could talk about what does it take to kind of bring these things to life in terms of a process, evaluating the CoE. What are some metrics for the CoE going forward? There's certainly an array of different considerations. And again, it depends not only on the audience, but you also have to think in another risk factor of especially with some of the more sensitive areas with automation lately, things such as ethics might come up to question how do ethics play a role. So
definitely, yeah. Perfect. So maybe taking one question from Jesse. So you're saying it's important to have the ability to speak to each different stakeholder in the terms of the different things that they want out of the CoE. So really that alignment, right? To paraphrase what you said.
Yeah, that's true. So
fantastic. Now I'm sure everyone is curious who's tuned in or will be watching this as a replay to hear maybe about one example where you've seen this CoE setup be really successful and why that has been the case. What has made it successful?
We've had some recent examples are setting up a CoE with a high technology company where that was one where automation was actually brought into the data and analytics CoE. As I mentioned, that could be one example, because in that organization, automation was pretty new, but they felt like, well, data and analytics people that create models, we're just going to have all the automation, the intelligent automation and AI stuff as part of this CoE. Part of what helped bring that to life in terms of success, looking at a little bit more macro level, is having the right operating model in place is certainly a consideration. Depending on the organization, some organizations might kind of start slow and have things a bit more centralized. it's kind of well known that there are 3 or 4 different archetypes. Some people call them organizing models for operating models, where you might eventually scale towards something where you have a central group that's really kind of setting all the standards, managing all the tools, the licenses, and all sorts of other things, but educating the rest of the organization to kind of be a bit more self-service and hopefully get to the point where they may even become, as you might hear these days, the idea of a citizen developer, citizen automator. I haven't quite heard anybody say that they're a citizen AI specialist yet, but you maybe 3 or 5 years down the timeline that it might you might see something like that. But that was one where it really took off. Another one was one where part of what drove the excitement was putting some branding around the CoE, almost making it almost like a digital storefront, as certainly a component, especially in a modern context. Some CoEs that don't succeed are kind of weak in that regard. I've seen people try to drive a CoE off of a shared drive, which of course is not going to work, or just a simple internet page or two. But when you have kind of a rather robust internal digital presence that you can even put some custom branding around and even do some fun things, create some events, lunch and learns. You'll see a legacy tool behind me, something I'd used before the rise of Mural and other tools like Figma, was I actually had a marker board on wheels, and I would just wheel it. You know, people would laugh. I would wheel it onto the elevator of one of the places I was at, go up the floor, and I would do lessons for half an hour right at somebody's desk, diagramming, drawing, if I couldn't do something larger, more of a context or a classroom setting. So automation can be tricky in terms of success and failure. You might have to do some broader organizational lunch and learns. With one of my clients in another part of the world, we did a large-scale lunch and learn for the entire organization to sit in to help allay their concerns about automation, because at that time, there was quite a bit in the press about the threats of automation. So we showed some research that, like, look, there's more stuff to do than there's going to be enough people, lots of stuff to do, people down below. And in between is, there's way more to do than there's enough people to basically handle the work. So, and then you have to, sometimes you have to kind of play it safe with a little bit of internal education and just kind of get people to be like, automation's not a scary thing. It's actually going to help you out, free you up. Maybe take a class because you can't do things because you're stuck doing some chore or task 3 days out of the month, every single month, that could potentially be automated.
That's a great point. Really helping take away that fear and show that it's not as scary as you might think when you hear AI or automation, right? Mm-hmm. There's one other question I have for you, and it's specifically around the organizational models. Where or how do you see CoEs starting? Is it typically that it's centralized and then over time maybe it matures into something like a federated model, where maybe the CoE looks more after standardization and governance and these type of things, but the individual satellites are independent and run the day-to-day on their own? Or do you see companies starting already with a federated model? Or maybe even other models than just those two that you've seen be successful?
Well, especially when you're bringing a CoE to life, it's just good to always keep that old maxim of crawl, walk, run. I have seen some companies try to run right to the federated model, which some people do see that as like for those of you who aren't aware, there's these different models. You start with a centralized model. There might be something that evolves towards a hub and spoke, and then things become a little bit more decentralized. I've heard some of these things be called competency centers before you get to CoE in terms of a maturity model. But maturity could be something that's a bit more of a misnomer that you have to watch out for, because for someone might show up and give you all this advice, management consultant here, giving you a little bit of warning about some of the other friends I have out there in the world. And maturity can sometimes be confused with complexity, where they show you all this complicated stuff and you're like, oh, how can I get there? It's like, you don't have to worry about getting there. You just have to worry about having an impact and driving value in your organization. And some of these that I've seen fizzle as they try to do that, that try to run right towards the aspirations and the end goal rather than getting some wins along the way and kind of building up your story and scaling up the CoE over time. So.
Perfect. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing it. I think that's a very important part for anyone wondering, well,
and
how do I actually...
Another insight that I'll share there real quick. I know I think we're running a little over time, hopefully not too long.
That's fine.
Is when, depending on the organization, a CoE might be just part of somebody's existing job. And if you don't have the right personality in place for that, they can fizzle because they're just overworked. They're not excited. They see it as another thing that you threw on top of their list. And they're just like, oh, I got to do this too. I got to do all this other stuff. I got wife, kids, or husband, kids, or, partner and kids, depending on what's going on. And in personal life too. So.
Got it. So maybe can you summarize the 3 key points for our audience to take away from today's episode? We talked a bit about, do you even need one? Do you even need a CoE?
Mm-hmm.
What are the organizational models and when does it work well? What should people take away from today?
The first thing is to make sure that you do the right kind of assessment before you even try to bring a CoE into place. It's good to have some kind of assessment to help you score the organization. Do your own internal research. Like I said, think of it as like a startup product market fit. The next is if you do find an audience and receptivity, start to kind of paint the picture of your mission and your vision and your roadmap for how the CoE can come to life, and then to pilot it and find some wins. And last but not least, a internal digital storefront is usually kind of the way to go. Because at least you can have a link to that and people can email the link out and say, learn more about my CoE, and send a link instead of killing them with a big PowerPoint deck or something. So,
awesome. Thanks so much for the summary. Now, folks, we're getting close to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your expertise, and for those of you in the audience for learning with us. Thanks, Chris.
No, thank you for the opportunity. There's plenty to talk about here, and who knows, maybe we'll have some follow-on conversations as well. Dig a little bit deeper, or double click, as some people like to say. So,
exactly. So for those in the audience, if there's anything you have more specific questions on, or would like to see a follow-up episode on one particular or 2 particular topics around the CoE, let me know. I'm happy to invite Chris back in and see how we can go a little deeper on some of these things. But until then, again, thank you so much for joining today, and see you next time for another round of the Intelligence Briefing Live. What's the buzz? Bye-bye.